Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation on a new and developing project that my team and I have named TealForensics. The project focuses on a combination of systems integration and digital forensic. And my name is Jeannie DeHetri and I am a member of the TealForensics project. So the TealForensics project, as I stated earlier, is a development for a new application. And the application will be a digital forensics concept teaching tool that will incorporate the collection and library of digital forensic tools from the Sleuth Kit, which will essentially serve as the backend for the application. And so what all of this means is that the application will be a project that is developed more for an educational environment than as a practical tool to send to law enforcement to use on like real world digital forensic cases. It's going to be more of a platform for users to be able to learn and to understand how to use the tools that are in the Sleuth Kit to properly investigate a disk image. And so this application will also use Python, specifically the Django framework, SAS, and SCSS scripting languages, and Bootstrap for device responsiveness on the front end. And then all together, this will be hosted on a Linux server. And so when diving into the development phase of this project, we learned very quickly that this project was not going to be as easy to develop as originally thought, because the Sleuth Kit is lacking sufficient documentation that explains and describes the tools that it has. And so you can imagine it's very hard to develop an application when you don't even understand the software that's going to support your back end of your application. And so my role on the team was to research and to test the various tools that would be important to our application to provide the right documentation for the developers to have in order to be able to develop the application. And so there is documentation out there on the Sleuth Kit and the tools that it has. There's like a whole wiki page that exists, but the documentation is just very inconsistent, and it's not very intuitive. So if you're new to the Sleuth Kit or new to digital forensics or just new to technology, and you were to look at this documentation, you would be very lost. You would not really understand what the documentation says. It would not really be a good aid for you to be able to understand how to use the Sleuth Kit and its tools, at least within a command line environment, which is the form that the Sleuth Kit comes in if you don't use it through a graphical user interface or a GUI. And so if we take a look here at the Sleuth Kit wiki, which does lay out the various tools and even categorizes them, you'll see it's a pretty decent list of tools. But again, the issue is the documentation. So if you click on like FSStat, you'll be taken to this very brief page. There is somewhat of a decent description on here. It tells you what the command will display and describes what that display will essentially mean. But again, if this is something that you're new to and isn't really something you understand, digital forensics is not a language you yet speak, none of this is really going to mean anything to you. And as you can see here, it says this page was last modified on September of 2008, which at this point is over 12 years ago. And so that says a lot in itself. And you can click on this automatically updated man page, but this again is going to be something that someone who is new to this concept and new to the Sleuth Kit and new to digital forensics and even new to technology is not really going to understand. There is like a description here and here of the tool. there's an outline here of like how you would structure the command, but you wouldn't understand this if you haven't really used the tools in this way before. And then there's a list here of the arguments that can be used with the tool or options. But if you don't understand the tools, if you don't understand the Sleuth Kit with any prior knowledge, this again is not really going to mean a whole lot to you. You're not really going to understand what any of this means, what it's going to do, or how to use it. And so when I said that the documentation was also inconsistent, you can click on like the FLS command here and you'll be taken to a page with some pretty sufficient documentation, in my opinion. You'll get some, it's not just a brief description of what the tool is. It does actually provide you some valuable information telling you what is what when you view the display that comes with running this command. And this also does come with a man page or a manual page that outlines the tool, like its options or arguments, a description, how to, format the tool, and all that. But again, there's not really anything here that really tells you how to kind of get started or how to get started with the tool. And so this is kind of the inconsistency in the documentation, and then of course, like the lack of documentation. And this is pretty standard for a lot of the tools. This one also does have some pretty sufficient documentation. But again, even these ones were last modified on March of 2010, right? That's 10 years ago, over 10 years ago at this point. So I'm sure the Sleuth Kit has gone through a lot of updates since 2010. And so we could even say even these documented tools may not be particularly up to date with whatever version the Sleuth Kit is on at this point. So that's a little bit problematic. And the Sleuth Kit does have a graphical user interface that is kind of known to be paired with it, which is known as Autopsy. Both the Sleuth Kit and Autopsy were developed by Brian Carrier, and it is an available platform. Autopsy is on Autopsy version 4 now, but each version of Autopsy presented kind of its own unique and individual issues. And so Autopsy version 2, its main issue is that it's not a very easily accessible application. It does still exist today, but it's only available through the Kali Linux distribution. And most people's computers don't come packaged or pre-installed with Kali Linux, right? People's computers usually come with Windows, or if you have like an Apple Mac, you have Mac OS. And so in order to even try to launch that Autopsy version 2 application, you had to figure out how to get a VMware or some kind of platform in order to host a virtual machine. You had to get the right ISO file for Kali Linux in order to connect it into your VMware to host to launch the virtual machine. And you had to make sure like you got the right file, and it had the one where you could launch or boot digital forensics mode. And then once you were able to figure all of that out, which isn't the easiest, you had to figure out how to launch Autopsy version 2 within Kali Linux, which required opening like a command prompt and having it activate the server, and then pulling the server address and opening that in a web browser, and then eventually you would get to Autopsy version 2. But as you can imagine, in an educational environment, that could in itself take about a half semester just to walk students through and be able to have them just access the application to even get started on using a tool. So TealForensics is going to aim to not have that much of a convoluted process in order to access it. It wants to just be a direct web application that can be downloaded on any operating system and be able to just be used by users who are verified or whatever. And Autopsy version 4 does kind of follow this web application model. Autopsy version 4 is very much drastically redesigned from Autopsy version 2. Autopsy version 4 is now in Java rather than Perl, which is what Autopsy version 2 was in, and HTML based. Autopsy version 4 is a now downloadable web application, but it was found that if you tried to launch Autopsy version 4 on a Linux operating system, the whole platform or software would just crash. It wouldn't even load, it wouldn't even let you really update any kind of disk image to be able to investigate. And so, again, kind of a unique and problematic issue that came with Autopsy version 4. And so, this is what kind of prompted the initiative to want to develop just something completely on its own that did not require having to use any of the versions of Autopsy. And so Autopsy version 4 is now really within the hands of Basis Technology. Brian Carrier is very much involved with the Basis Technology company. He's the credited CTO of the company, and he's credited as the leader of the digital forensics team there. So his hands are still very much in the pot with Autopsy, but it's more of a team development now than when Autopsy version 2 was around. That was, I believe, strictly Brian Carrier's work. So both have gone through very many developments over the last few years and have been refined in many different ways and have each come with their own issues in turn with that. And so we needed research in order to develop our application on what tools were going to be important to our needs and in order to conduct an investigation on a hard drive's disk image. So we wanted to know, what do the tools do, how to use the tools, and what exactly is the information telling us that the tools provide to us, the user. And so that information will be available in the next video, which will dive into the Sleuth Kit's tools and demonstrate how to use them.